very often in public deliberations, and there's an interest in balance. And balance is usually both quote unquote, both sides. And we don't want to have bias, and we don't want to have voices suppressed. So there's kind of a making sure there's justice in this system, and that, you know, whether we're going to choose A or B, there's nothing that's going to, you know, bias us towards A rather than B right at the start. Whatever decision we come to should be based on understanding what's involved and reason. But I'm saying from a wise democracy perspective, although minimizing bias and suppression of voices is very desirable, from generating wisdom, we want to have all major perspectives, not just, you know, A and B, but G and Q and the other ones, and significant views from the edges. So how do you do that? You can't cover all possible perspectives. There's an infinite number of perspectives. All possible information. There's an infinite number of information. All possible interconnections. You can't cover it all, but you want to think in terms of full spectrum. And if there's lots of people and views from on the edges, you may want to include, you know, 3 of them or half dozen of them, just to stir up the pot, make it so it doesn't land too solidly on just the main things that people are talking about, like having the Green Party involved instead of just the liberals and the conservatives, for example. And the more, obviously, the more we base our efforts on a full range of information, the more likely we are to take into account what needs to be taken into account. We're not going to miss things that are obvious. And there's also ways of knowing. There's analytic ways of knowing. We want to gather all the information we can and see how it connects up, you know. And there's intuitive ways of knowing. And there's heartfelt ways of knowing, and knowing in our guts. You know, it's like we want to have all the different ways of knowing available to us, as well as a full range of information. And if we bring all of our cognitive power, individually and collectively, to a situation, we will be able to generate something that is wise, or at least much wiser than it would be if we had a whole pile of blind spots in our dealing with things. And there's not really any one method that does this really well. There are methods that get beyond the A or B choice kind of minimization of this. And some of those are national issues forums. They have a arrangement called Framing for Deliberation, where they get between 3 and 5 major perspectives on a particular issue. And they describe that each one of those perspectives, here's one approach, here's another approach, here's another approach, here's the arguments and evidence to support each of those approaches. And they present that to the citizen deliberators right at the beginning. So it shakes up their, you know, each one looks reasonable within its own frame of reference, and it shakes up their, any solid ideas they might have on it and opens them up. They aren't supposed to pick one necessarily. They're supposed to look at the whole realm that is covered by these various perspectives and see if they can come up with something that is better than any of them, that has the blessings of all of them and minimizes the limitations of all of them. Another interesting one was the British Columbia Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform. They spent a lot of time, this was every other weekend for almost a year. These 160 people met, and they went through a lot of different ways of doing elections and asked for information from a wide variety of people and organizations, and had public hearings and all the rest. They really looked for different perspectives before they made their decision. And when I think of like citizen juries, for example, which do have briefings, try and have balanced, informative briefings for the deliberators, I always want somewhere in the middle of that for the citizen jurors to take a break in little teams of 2 or 3 and go search on the web. Go search for interesting perspectives and solutions to their issue on the web, just to stir up the pot and get outside the box of whatever mainstream options and briefings they've been given. So this is one of the key areas that needs work for Wise Democracy, because if you're focused on fairness rather than wisdom, you then don't tend to get as full a spectrum as you do if you're focused on wisdom and you're trying to cover all bases and not miss anything. So that's one of the advantages of having this as your center of gravity of Wise Democracy.